Hey everybody, Bekka here. Today I am doing a collaboration with Bill from Bill and Red's History Production. And we are going to be talking about plagues, pestilence, disorder from all of this. So it's going to be a fun time. So let's get started.
Plague doctors, they became very crucial. I mean, the Black Death takes place over roughly 15 to 20 years, between 1346 and 1353-ish, and it kills 200 million people, which is 50% of the world's population. So, if you think that only 1,000 years before, the same disease killed the same infection killed 40% of the world's population. 1,000 years later, there's more people, and it kills 50%. So if you're alive today, that means that your ancestors survived the Black Death.
Right.
And that is something to be proud of.
And that's something that, pardon the pun, that plagued Europe for centuries. You know, all the way until the mid-1700s, that plague kept coming up over and over again in different pockets. So, really, yes, if you're here today, then you're a stronger person because at least one or more of your ancestors did survive that.
Yes, they did. Well, the thing about the Black Death, the bubonic plague, which actually towards the end turned to the pneumonic plague, which is the respiratory infection. So basically, pneumonia. You end up with pneumonia, your lungs filled up with that same pusculous, wonderful stuff, and you choke to death on your own fluids. The Pope Clementine at the time, he had made a decree that all cats and dogs to be taken rid of and getting rid of, executed, murdered, to the point where they had a bounty on dogs and cats throughout Europe, which was ordered by the Roman Catholic Church. And this is where we come back to cats being bad luck, which we covered in another episode.
Right.
So what it did is, instead of stopping the spread of the bubonic plague, it actually increased the spread of it because there was nothing alive, no natural predators roaming around that were eating the rats in the towns, that were carrying the fleas into the homes. And so once again in history, we're this close to solving a problem, and we take a wrong turn. And that's the reason that the death toll got so high so quickly.
Right. Besides
the fact that commerce between nations was very well established at that time. You had major cities like London where people were living in small cramped areas and the filth in the streets. And so it was just a breeding ground for rats and rodents.
Well, and if you think about it, they were closing up or locking in the people.
Right.
Well, this was before plumbing, so you still have to pee and poo. You still have garbage. What are you going to do with all of that? Well,
just goes in the street.
Now, well, if they're locked up in the house and can't even throw the bucket out the window, then
it increases the problem.
Yeah,
it multiplies it.
Because now you're sitting in your filth, and literally in your home. It's death sentence.
And they thought it was two things. One of two things. It was because you were a sinner, or someone in your household was a sinner. That was one. That it was God's wrath upon you. And it was so believed in that you had monks and friars that would walk around and flog themselves to their bleeding in the streets, trying to relieve your sins through their pain and suffering. It was the Dark Ages were an amazing time, and I can't wait till I get to cover the Dark Ages in depth, but this is our little snippet of that. So, as you seen a minute ago, Red here, she had this mask.
This is the plague doctor's mask. And what they would do is, this particular one doesn't have a cover over the back, but they would have like a little pocket in there. And as they wore it, they would have different herbs that they would stuff in that pocket. And the herbs that would have been used would have been common herbs that everybody would have been growing in their gardens. You know, most of the aromatic herbs you really wouldn't be able to go wrong with, whether it was rosemary, thyme, rue is another herb that was commonly used. I saw references of horehound, which I kind of disagree with that, because horehound's more of an herb that you want to take internally for chest congestion and things like that. It's not that aromatic.
Well, I mean, what was the thought of? I mean, it's the terminology is missing my brain here.
Miasmas.
Miasmas.
Yeah, miasma is the nasty smells of the community, whether it come from swampy lands, shitty streets. You know, they just threw their refuge or their chamber pots and stuff like that out in the street. I don't know if you've ever heard of the saying "garde-loup." That is them actually giving you the warning that they're fixing to throw crap out into the street. So guard a loo. You know, there's a loo. They're throwing the stuff out of the loo into the street. And that's where different customs of the women, they walked on one side and the men walked on the other side, because the men would take the brunt of the loo if it got thrown.
Walk around with pissy shirts on. That's awesome.
Yeah, and the parasol as well. That was used as a guard to protect yourself from the loo.
Yeah. So back to what'd you call it again? It's a
miasma.
Miasma. So the thought process behind that. Once again, it's one of these things, man. We're so close,
yeah.
But yet we take this hard left. So they would actually take the herbalist in the community. Mm-hmm. So like her job would be to she would wear a large like leather coat, long leather coat, a full brim hat, that mask, full with the herbs like she just described, gloves, and thick pants, like canvas pants, and she would go in to clean out the homes after the 40 days. I did not tell y'all what so quarantine means 40 days, by the way. So you'd have to stay in your home for 40 days. They'd actually padlock you in and put a big red X on your door. So they had the comprehension, but not quite there. So the plague doctor's job was to go in and to remove the corpses out to the people with the bell.
Ding!
We have the bell. So they would remove the corpses.
There would be somebody going through the street, actually ringing a bell. Bring out your dead. Who's heard that before?
So, as the herbalist, her job was to go in, to remove the bodies, and because of the wonderful outfit that she would have wore at the time, the fleas couldn't get to her. They thought that it was because of the herbs that were shoved down into the beak of this, because of the
miasma.
Miasma. I'll eventually learn how to say it. It's in the head, but so after they removed the bodies, their next job was to purify the house. And so they didn't have Clorox, bleach, there was no Febreze, there was no, Wikipedia for them to go and figure it out.
Those things actually don't work anyway.
Well, There was nothing for them to do except use the knowledge that they had of herbal remedies. So vinegar, which we have some homemade vinegar here.
Everybody would have known how to make their own vinegar.
So vinegar was used a lot, and then they would burn herbs like sage and other herbs, not to actually cleanse, even though they were cleansing with them.
Correct.
It was because they thought it was the smell that would cause the next family to move into that apartment or bungalow or whatever, that they would end up getting it. When in fact, it was the rodents living in the thatch roof and eating the filth and stuff throughout the town that was spreading it around.
Well, and I would like to put a little asterisk here. You know, he's referring to me as an herbalist. Yes, I am an herbalist. I am a 21st century herbalist. I would not have been considered a doctor of the time.
She would have been a witch.
Yes, I would have been the witch.
I could have been the doctor.
Or a healer. You know, and there's different names for the female healer of the time, wherever you're at. But the plague doctors, the herbalists of the time, those would have all been men. Unfortunately, women are considered ignorant. They can't learn. They don't know anything about the world. And us women know different, don't we?
Are we done with the Black Death? Can we move on?
Is
there anything else you want to do?
Well, one of the things that has been passed on from the Black Death, if you get into herbalism or even essential oils, you know, something along the natural healing, it won't take you long to hear about the vinegar of the four thieves.
Oh, yeah.
Or nowadays it's called the oil of the four thieves, especially if you get into some types of essential oils. But interesting thing about the vinegar of the four thieves, it's now considered a folklore, and I didn't even take the time to try to track it back to original source. I figured it would be too much time and really at this aspect not even worth it. But if you look up online, you will find a plethora of different recipes of the vinegar of the four thieves. And the story behind the four thieves is these were thieves that were going into these houses during the Black Death or the plague and stealing whatever they could off the dead bodies. And when they were caught, they had the choice of getting hung or confessing of how they were able to continue to go into these houses time and time again.
How desperate do you have? Put yourself into these people's position, though. Not to interrupt, but to interjoin here. How desperate is your life that you are? One, you're stealing from people. All right, so we know that that's uncalled for. But two, you're stealing from something that you know that you could die. Like nobody's making it out. If you got one of these pusculous boils under your armpit or in your groin, and that, by the way, that's where they first start, is in your groin and your armpits.
And they could be sizes of apples before they
roughly
burst.
Yeah, roughly about the size of an apple. Very painful, and then they would burst and it ooze out, and it's great. So anyways,
no mashed potatoes for dinner, please.
I could taste it like almost in my mouth. If none of y'all have ever watched Dr. Pimple Popper, she's ruined any of that stuff for me.
Imagine a pimple like the size of that you would be able to hold it in your hand.
And it's just, but it's black because your blood is curdling in there and just.
And it smells.
And then
the miasma is awful.
And then you are so desperate that you are like, you know what? Screw that lock. Forget that little red X. They can't do anything. Get your homeboys together and y'all go in there and rob them blind before the herbalist can when he goes to clean the bodies up. Because that's how he got paid, by the way.
Well, and they eventually got caught, and their sentence was to go bury the dead bodies I love the karma that just kind of thrown at them. You know, they did give up the recipe, and the recipe is said to be in the court records, but you know, like I said, you know, it really, to me, it really doesn't matter, because all of the recipes, once you know herbalism a little bit, it's all the aromatic herbs which would be beneficial in those aspects. You know, some of them I could argue with, I doubt they had, you know, like one of them was lemon. You know, in the Middle Ages in England.
It's Dark Ages.
Oh, okay. In the Dark Ages in England, I doubt thieves had access to any lemons that might be available.